I have loved birds since I was a little kid. I had my parents pointing them out to me in the backyard, which is probably similar to what a lot of people in this class today might be familiar with. So birds just fascinate me, they delight me. So I'm glad to be talking about birds today with you all. I wanted to make a note before we started that we are going to focus on songbirds today. There will probably be another opportunity in another Silver Clovers class for talking about waterfowl and birds of prey, kind of different birds other than the songbirds that you might expect to see in your backyard. So let me share my screen and show you the presentation. All right, I hope everyone can see that. Juju, do you see it?
Yep, I see your presentation.
All right, well, we'll just get started. So the question you might be asking today, which I hope I can answer, is where do I begin? Gosh, there are a lot of birds out there, even just the ones that show up in our backyard. And they look a lot different. They act different. They sound different. Where do I start? So today I wanted to share with you a method for bird identification that I learned when I first started getting serious about birding, which was about 20 years ago. And this is a technique that you might want to practice with birds you already know, like robins and cardinals. But I will explain a little bit more of that as we go along. So I'll answer this question: where do I begin? And I'm going to help you get the gist of birds today. GIS is an acronym. It stands for General Impression, Size, and Shape. So these are the key aspects of birds that we're going to pay attention to. And these are clues that you can use to get closer to understanding what bird are you seeing. So let's start with color. Color is the first thing I always notice when I'm looking at birds. I'm just kind of tuned into that. So I like to start with color, and a couple of things you can ask yourself about color. What colors stand out? Sometimes a bird will be all one color or mostly one color. So notice what that color is. And the next thing you might look at with color is, where do you see the different colors? Often birds will have different colors on different parts of their body. So maybe their head is one color and their body is another one. Maybe their wings are yet another color. So make sure to notice each of those. So let's look at some examples. So on the left here, we have a bird that is mostly yellow. And as I look more at it, I can see that it also has some black on it. It's black on the top of the head. It's black on the wings. If you can see the tail, you also notice it's black on the tail. And I also noticed that the beak is a little bit orange, not all the way, mostly. And that bird is an American goldfinch. We'll discuss all of these birds in a little more detail later. This bird in the middle, I'm looking at the color and I see a lot of gray. I see that the wings are mostly gray, and so is the tail. If I look at the back and the top of the head, I see it is kind of an iridescent blue-green. And looking some more, I can see underneath the chin, and it will be also underneath the body. If you see it, it's white. So some nice contrasting colors there to look at. And our third bird on this page, it's got a mix of colors, but they're pretty striking. Mostly this lovely orange, but also some black that really makes a sharp contrast with the orange. So I see black On the head, notice it is completely black. And there's a bill that is kind of a silvery gray, which you will notice makes a nice contrast against the black head. And then black, some on the back, on the wings, and a little bit on the tail. So let's go to another aspect of GIS. That's behavior. So most birds have typical behaviors, and you can see those when they're coming to your feeder or hopping around on the ground. So take a look at their behavior. What is the bird doing? What do you see it mostly doing? And that's another key to identifying the bird. Does it perch, like on a bird feeder or on a branch or in a shrub? Or does it cling to the tree, cling very closely? Does it walk around or does it hop around? How does it move? Does it flit? Is it a flitting bird? It's on the move all the time? Or does it just kind of stay in place? So let's look at some examples here. Here's a couple of birds on a feeder. They're kind of flitting around. They come in and they leave. Here's another bird. It's on the ground, just kind of hanging out and looking around. And then we have another bird that is kind of clinging to this branch. You see how it's kind of sticking really close to that branch. It's kind of flitting around rapidly as well. Another clue you can use to identify a bird is its location, and we often call that its habitat, where it prefers to be, where it prefers to feed, where it feels safest. So habitat can include your bird feeder. On the left, we see some birds that are really comfortable with being at a bird feeder. They want to come over there and find something to eat. We can find birds on the ground. Some birds are more commonly seen on the ground. This bird in the center, you will often see it on the ground. It's a white-throated sparrow. Other birds you may more likely find in forest or woods, such as this white-breasted nuthatch on the right, which likes to hop around on trees. There are other places you might typically find birds. It may be if you're out for a walk, you could find birds in a prairie or grassland or on water. Now, size is a good indicator, a good clue to what bird you're looking at. And I suggest using the American robin as your standard for comparing birds of different sizes. And the American robin is 10 inches long, approximately, from the tip of its beak to the end of its tail. Now, you don't have to memorize this, but I think everyone is probably pretty familiar with the robin because it's a really common bird. So you can ask yourself, when you're looking at a bird that you don't know what it is, but you really like to find out what it is, try to compare it with the size of a robin. It's helpful if the robin is there, but you can learn to compare these sizes even if there's not a robin standing right next to it, because we're not always that lucky. So ask yourself, is this mystery bird larger or smaller than a robin? Or it might be about the same size. And we can further ask if a bird is larger than a sparrow or smaller than a robin. And we can, from there, we can further ask, is it smaller than a crow, but larger than a robin? So this ends up being kind of a continuum, and I will give you an idea of some reference birds you can use on this continuum. So here they are. This is a house sparrow, very common sparrow, 6 inches long. This is the European starling, 8 inches, a little bit bigger. Here's our robin, right about in the middle. And a blue jay, another common bird, 12 inches. And here's our crow at 19 inches. It is enormous. So each of these birds is a very common bird. Most of them are likely to be seen in your backyard or when you're walking around. All of these birds look the same all year round. They don't change their plumage for the winter. You will always see them looking more or less the same here. And all of them are present year round. So you can practice your identification skills on these birds any time of year. Here's another category for helping to identify a bird in the GIS system. Look at the features of the bird. We're going to narrow it down a little bit. We've kind of started large. Now we're going to narrow it down. So what can we look at here? We can take a look at the bird's head. Does it have markings on it? Does it have a crest on top? A crest is a little tuft of feathers that stand straight up from the top of the head. We can take a look at the beak. What is the size of the beak in relation to the bird's head? Is it short? Is it long? Is it skinny? Is it broad? And another item we could look at is combination, I guess. Look at the tail and look at the wings when it's flying or when it's at rest. What is the size of the tail in relation to the bird? Is it very long? Is it kind of short? What do the wings look like? Are there some markings on the wings? Are they plain? So let's break this down a little bit. My slide is not working. Maybe we will just go on to the next one. All right. Trying to go on. There we go. Now it's working. Haha. All right. Here's a demonstration of a crest on a couple of birds. The bird on the top is a cardinal. Big, tall crest, very easy to spot. And the bird below is a tufted titmouse, a smaller bird, but also has this crest, and you will generally notice it. All right, we'll look at a couple of examples of bird beaks that are pretty different. On the top is a house finch. Finches are seed eaters. They need strong bills to crack the shells of their seed so they can get into the yummy parts inside. So they have very heavy, stocky bills, and they're often somewhat short. Now below it is a red-breasted nuthatch. This is a small bird, but you notice that the bill is very slender and a little bit longer in relation to its head. The nuthatch is more of an insect eater, and it likes to tap on tree bark. So this is a good tool for tapping on tree bark and getting in there to get some yummy insects. And finally, we're going to look at bird tails. On the top here, we have another red-breasted nuthatch, and look at the size of the tail, the length of the tail in relation to the body. Stubby little tail, it hardly has any tail. So this is a good clue to look for. Now, below it, we have a mockingbird, and look at that tail, really long. It's like the same length of the bird's body. So that's a clue to look for when you are looking at these birds. And we talked a little bit about behavior, but we're going to go into it a little bit more. And silhouettes are pretty helpful when you're looking at behavior or posture, because you might not always be able to see the bird clearly, but this will kind of give you an idea, a general idea. So we have a few categories of bird behavior, and I should mention, not every bird is going to always do this, but these are the most I'm looking at the most common behaviors for these types of birds. So you're most likely to see these behaviors, not exclusively. So the first category is perching, that is sitting on a branch or maybe in a shrub or maybe on your bird feeder. So there are kind of two categories of perching, and birds can perch upright. Hope you can see my pointer here. I'm kind of indicating that this cardinal, which is in silhouette on the left, is really sitting pretty straight up in relation to this twig it's sitting on. And the right one to the right is an oriole, which tends to lean over a little bit. It's not sitting really straight up. And there are other birds that have that same behavior. So second category I'm going to look at is clinging birds. And there are a couple of categories of birds that will show this behavior. And by clinging, I mean the bird, when it's on a tree trunk or a tree branch, will hold on and sit very closely to the branch or the trunk. And it will generally scoot up and down as opposed to hopping, where you can see it really separate itself from the tree trunk or the branch. And often these birds can go either way. The silhouette on the right of a nuthatch, these birds can go up and down vertically on a trunk easily either way. It's a really fun behavior to observe. And woodpeckers will do similar things. The larger woodpeckers might not go up and down vertically, but they have the same sort of scooting mechanism to go up and down branches and tree trunks. And the last category I'll talk about is birds that are frequently seen on the ground. A number of birds prefer to forage for food on the ground. They might eat insects that are in the grass, or they might be looking for seed, for instance, underneath your bird feeder in the grass. And some just prefer to forage on the ground rather than hop up onto your bird feeder, because other birds certainly do knock the seed off. And a couple of the birds that you often see on the ground are robins and crows. Here is a tip for you. When you are looking at birds and you're trying to identify them, maybe it's a bird you have never seen, maybe it's a bird you have seen and I'm not sure what that is. I'd really like to get a better look at it. Put down the bird guide, put down your phone, keep your eyes on that bird. Because what happens? Look at a bird, it flies away. That's what birds do. So I'd encourage you to train yourself to just take a really good look at the bird as long as it's sitting there. Because if you look at a bird, you see a bird fly up, say, ooh, I really want to look at that. Ooh, I wonder what it is. If you go looking for your bird guide, you try to pick your phone up, get your phone turned on, poof, bird's gone. So I suggest try to either jot down if a paper is handy, or just say out loud or in your head, try to read off some of the just characteristics, general impression, size, and shape. So for these birds we're looking at here that keep flying off, in that little bit of time we have there, we can see, okay, this bird is mostly black. It's about the size of a robin. Okay, when I see it flying off, oh, I get a little flash of red on the wings. All right. And also I notice that it's mostly sitting upright. And if you are wondering, these are red-winged blackbirds. Now, birds will be a little tricky sometimes. Many of them will generally look the same, but there are times when they can look different than, for instance, the image that might be in your bird guide. So let's go over a few reasons that birds might look different for different reasons and different times. One reason is the gender of the bird. As I mentioned with those birds earlier where we compared the size, sexes of the birds will, those birds, beg your pardon, the birds that I went over for reference, those birds always look the same all year round. They don't change. But in this case, some of those birds do look different between the male and the female. They just always have different plumage, and that's often because the males are trying to attract females before they have their broods. So they want to look flashy. So on the left is a male red-winged blackbird. On the right is a female. A lot of difference there, but there are still points you could look at that will help you decide what they are. Second category is the season of the year. And a few birds that you would commonly see in your backyard have this practice. Now, both of these birds are male American goldfinches. But the bird on the right, the picture on the right is showing this bird during the winter time. The most of the year in the warm months, the American goldfinch, the male bird, has this fantastic bright yellow. I'm just so excited in the spring when I see the birds change from their kind of muted, soft brown to this delightful yellow. It's my sign of spring, makes me very happy. But it's something to remember. Although you can notice that even between the summer plumage and the winter plumage, you still have a really strong contrast between the very dark wings and the body color, whichever color it is. Third category I'm going to talk about is age. You may not always encounter this because juvenile birds may not be as apt to come to your bird feeders, but if you have a lot of trees and shrubs, and if you have some nests nearby, you might see this. So generally, juvenile birds are going to look different than adults. So what we're seeing here is a red-bellied woodpecker. On the left, that is an adult male. You can see that red kind of mohawk strip over the top of the head. On the right, this is a juvenile bird. Does not have the red. Looks kind of like the adult, but if you see a bird like this, you say, well, there's nothing on a head. What is it? This gives you a little bit of a clue that this could be a juvenile bird. You notice it's a little skinnier than the adult. So let's talk a moment about getting a closer look at birds. When you have bird feeders outside, generally they may be pretty close, but might not be. And if you go out and walk and look at birds, they're not guaranteed to be very close where you can get a really good look at them. So what do you use? I recommend binoculars. Binoculars are really the best tool for getting a closer look at birds. And they have a range of prices, but you can get into a decent pair of binoculars for maybe $70. You can go up from there, obviously. But if you are just getting started and you want to get a pair of binoculars to start looking a little more at birds, you can start a little lower. There's a range of binocular types and magnifications, and we may go over that at the end if you want more information. I also have some resources for more information that I'll mention at the end. But I recommend binoculars because they are really easy to use. You pick them up, you put your eyes on them, and you turn the focus knob, and you're there. So I would recommend, if you're going to go shopping for binoculars, just make sure you get a pair that is comfortable for you. Someone else may recommend, oh yes, try these. But if those binoculars are not comfortable for you, maybe you have small hands, maybe you have difficulty with dexterity in your hands, try different ones out and find something that you can use comfortably, because if you can't, it's just going to be a distraction while you're trying to look at birds. A lot of people do use digital cameras to take photos of birds and then look at the pictures later and try to identify them. This is fine, but I just caution you, it's more expensive to get into a digital camera that's going to have the features that you would need to take good photos of birds, meaning photos that are in focus, photos that have good color, good resolution. In order to get those, it's necessary to have a camera that has either a longer lens, interchangeable lenses, so you could get a longer one, or a good zoom feature. In addition, if you're not familiar with digital cameras, the learning curve is a lot steeper than binoculars. Binoculars, you pick them up, you go. And digital camera, they're easier to use than cameras used to be, but there's still some fussing that you have to do. And you may want to skip that unless you're already familiar and comfortable using digital cameras. Now, I have to say, I do not recommend a cell phone camera for getting a closer look at birds. I know they're convenient. You probably have one with you a lot of the time or within reach, but they really don't take good pictures of things that are far away, as birds are sometimes. Taking pictures through windows, not great. If you try to zoom with a digital camera, or with a cell phone camera, the more you zoom, the wobblier it's going to be. It's just not the right tool. So I would skip the cell phone camera and go with one of the two other options that we've already mentioned. So for heaven's sake, enough talking here. Let's look at some birds. This is what you came for. So in this presentation, I am grouping birds by their predominant color, and some bird guides will group their birds by predominant color. Some will do it other ways, but we will look at birds by color today. So we have red, blue, black, black and white, yellow, orange, brown, and gray. So mostly the typical colors of the birds that you're likely to see in your backyard. So let's get started. We will start with red birds. And speaking of red bird, this is the name that my grandfather used. My grandfather from Southwest Missouri always called the northern cardinal the red bird, and you'll hear that occasionally. It's accurate. This is really one of our only completely red birds, if you don't count the little bit of black that's on the face. So this bird is a little smaller than a robin. and it is present year round. You can see that the sexes do look different, but females are probably going to be seen in the company of males. So that's a good clue for you. You can look at the shape and the size and the beak on the female. And when you see it near a male, you say, oh, yes, now I see. And cardinals will come to feeders, but they are often seen on the ground. They do like foraging on the ground for food. And they sit upright if you see them perching on branches or bird feeders. Here's another bird that is reddish, I'd say. This is the house finch. Has this nice purpley yellow, much less of a true red and a little bit of purple in this color. This is a sparrow-sized bird, and it is present year-round. A good thing to check for with the house finch to distinguish it from most of the common sparrows is the streaking on the side. You can see that on the male and a little bit on the female. It's underneath the wings, but to the side of what we would call the breast, the main front portion underneath the bird. And you are generally not going to see a sparrow that has this much color on it. So that's another clue to identifying a house finch. Now, I know this is really not completely a reddish bird, but yeah, well, I didn't have any other green birds, so I put it in with red. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the main hummingbird that we have in this part of the country. It's very, very unusual to see one that's not a ruby throat. So it's generally safe to say, okay, ruby-throated hummingbird. These birds are unmistakable for their size. They are very tiny. And for the behavior, they hover. Their wings beat about 50 times a second. They just look like a blur most of the time. So they can hover in place. They can go up, down, forwards, and backwards. And they feed on nectar, so they do require special feeders. You will only see hummingbirds in the warm months. They migrate. They like to go somewhere warmer. And a note, the red underneath the chin, those are iridescent feathers, meaning that they reflect light differently according to the angle you're looking at it. So at other angles, this red area under the throat can look a dark color, but you watch the bird enough and it's probably going to go at an angle that you can see that terrific red flash out. All right, we're on to bluebirds. And speaking of bluebirds, here is our bluebird. This is the eastern bluebird. It is a perching bird and it sits upright. It is smaller than a robin and it is present year-round. The orangey feathers on the breast are contrasted with that nice medium blue on the wings and tail and the top of the head. The female, you can see, is generally a paler color of blue, has kind of almost more gray than blue, but you will frequently see these birds in pairs. So again, if you see the female and you might be a little confused, what is that bird? It's a little different. Look for a male, which is probably going to be nearby, and you can compare the size and the behavior and the beak, which is a little small beak. They're insect eaters. All right, the blue jay is pretty distinctive. It is a little larger than a robin, and it is present year-round, and it looks like this all year round. It's another bird that's pretty unmistakable for its size and for the color of the feathers and the arrangement. You see that it does have a crest on top of its head. It will often raise that crest up to look impressive to other birds. Has this pointed black beak, has kind of a black necklace that comes down from the nape of the neck down to just above the breast. It is sometimes an aggressive bird. I wouldn't call it a bully, but it's letting you know what its agenda is. And it, as you can see in this picture, it does perch, but it's one of those birds that perch and kind of lean over. All right, we're going to jump now to birds that are black, mostly or all black. And this is our American crow. It's one of the largest birds that you would be likely to see in your backyard. It sits, somewhere between upright and leaned over, hard to say. It is generally a ground bird, so you will see it hopping along the ground. This bird is almost twice as large as a robin, so it's very distinctive for that size. And it is present year-round, and both of the sexes look alike. You can notice, if you're close enough to see it, that the beak is contrasts with the dark black of the feathers. It's kind of a silvery color. It's a fairly large beak for the bird's size. You can see up in the upper right that when it's flying, the tail is kind of a fan shape, and you can see the ends of the wings have these individual feathers that almost look like fingers. Now, what that crow is doing in that picture in the upper right is harassing a hawk. That's a red-tailed hawk. Crows are not bashful, and if they see a bird that they think needs to get lost, they will let it know. So they will chase it around and caw at it and say, "Get out of here." So you will sometimes see crows in small groups when they show up in your yard. Here's another bird that is black mostly. This is the common grackle. This bird is a little larger than the robin, and it is present year-round, but it's rare to see them in the wintertime. I hardly ever see a grackle in the wintertime. I assume they're somewhere else, not in my backyard. So grackles are generally ground feeders. If they are standing or perching, they generally stand or perch upright. The male does have feathers that are iridescent, again, feathers that will change their color according to the angle you're looking at them. So this male is, in this photo, is turned just so you can really see what the feathers look like at the right angle. Otherwise, if you are not looking at them just at the right angle, they will look more black, but their feathers are glossy. So that's a clue to look for to distinguish them from other black birds. You notice the female is a little less bulky, doesn't have the fancy colors, but they both have, if you notice, pretty large beaks and pretty outstanding white eyes with a black center, another key to look for. Here is another very common black bird. This is the European starling, and it is, in fact, a European bird. It's called an Old World species. It's not native to this continent, so that's why it has the name European, to distinguish it. It is a perching bird, and it will sit upright. We'll see it on power lines and in trees and on fences. See it in a lot of places. It is smaller than a robin, and it is present year-round. you can see from these pictures, the female does look a little different than the male, but they both have dark feathers. They're a little glossy, a little iridescent. They have orange legs, which is in contrast to their dark feathers. The female, you might notice, does not have the orange beak that the male does. But again, you're likely to see these birds in flocks. So if you see a female starling and you think, well, what is that? Look around, you're very likely to see a male pretty nearby, and you can compare those orange legs and kind of speckly feathers and the shape of the beak, which is kind of long and pointed. All right, another black bird, and we mentioned this one already. This is the red-winged blackbird for kind of obvious reasons. That terrific red epaulette, we call it, on the shoulder, that's at the top of the wing where it meets the body. It is smaller than a robin, and it's present year-round, looks the same year-round, although, as we mentioned before, the male and the female do look different. These are flocking birds, so if you see a female, which is easy to confuse with other birds, look around again for the male. Notice that the beak is a little heavier, but still very, very sharp. And the legs are about the same color as the body, so dark legs. We have a couple of black and white birds, so we'll go over these now. This is the red-bellied woodpecker. I know you can't see a red belly. Sometimes birds are named in weird ways, and this one I believe was named this because it was named for looking at a dead red-bellied woodpecker, and there is a teeny tiny bit of red on the belly, but don't expect to see it when you see it in the wild. So the red-bellied woodpecker is a little larger than a robin, and it is present year-round. And the male and female are very nearly identical. The female is just missing a little bit of the red on the top of the head, but otherwise they look the same. They have this completely white underneath. They have some red on the head. They have this very long, strong, pointed beak because they feed on insects, and so they are pecking on trees and tree bark to find those insects that they like to eat. So a key for identifying the red-bellied woodpecker are the stripes on the back, black and white stripes, and they are generally horizontal. So it's kind of like a ladder. You can remember that. Now, this is a pair of birds that vex me all the time. So if you find these confusing, you are not alone. Lots of people call them, find them confusing. Not just me. The downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker. To tell you the truth, when I see one of these birds in a backyard or out in the wild, I just look at it and say, "Oh, downy hairy." It could be either one, and I'm maybe not bothered by which one it is, but I have to look for some clues to try to discover which one it is. So the clues you can see pretty easily in this photograph, which I've never seen them together like this, so it's lucky that we have this photo. But the downy woodpecker is the smaller of the two. It is considerably smaller than a robin. The hairy woodpecker is more close to the size of a robin. The other key to look for is the beak. The downy woodpecker, you can see, has a pretty short beak in relation to the size of its head. And the hairy woodpecker has a pretty enormous beak. It's almost the same length as the width of the head. So those are the clues. These birds are both present year-round, and they are same plumage, male and female. And like other woodpeckers, they have this clinging and scooting behavior if they are on trees. Let's switch to yellowbirds. And we have mentioned the American goldfinch before. Also mentioned the difference in plumage. These are perching birds and they will sit upright. It's smaller than a sparrow, not too much, but it is distinctly smaller. If you see a sparrow and a goldfinch together, the goldfinch is smaller and a little more slender in general than sparrows. They are present year round, but as we mentioned, the male's plumage is different in the winter than it is in the warm months. But there is always that strong contrast between the wing color and the body color. All right, jump to orange or partly orange birds. And here's our American robin, our kind of gold standard for comparing to other birds. It will perch or it will be on the ground, but it sits upright in either place. It is present year round and both the sexes look the same. And really, this is a good bird to practice with because the parts of the bird and their colors are pretty easy to distinguish. The back and the tail, it's all the same kind of medium gray. The breast from the neck down to the legs, it's all that nice medium orange. The head, it's all with just a little bit of difference, it's all black. The beak, it's mostly a yellow color. So you will often see this bird in flocks, and they are pretty fun little birds to watch. All right, here's another orange bird, a really lovely one. This is the Baltimore oriole. We do have different species of oriole that will show up here, but this is probably the most common one. And as you see on this slide, these are birds that you will only see in the warm months. You don't see them in the wintertime. They also migrate to go find somewhere warm to spend the winter. They are perching birds, but as you see in these photos, they lean, they kind of perch almost parallel to whatever surface they're on, whether it's a branch or a bird feeder. They are about the size of a robin. And whether it's male or female, as mentioned before, there's always a pretty strong contrast between the color of the wings and the color of the rest of the body, especially the underside. So the differences in the plumage are pretty clear between the male and female. Male has the black on the head. The female does not. The female is also tends to be more of a dusty yellow. But again, you're probably pretty likely to see a male if you see a female. And let's jump over to brown birds. This is probably the most common sparrow that you're going to see at your feeders and in your backyards. This is the house sparrow. And it is a perching bird, and it does tend to move around a lot. It hops here and there, less than some little birds, but it does quite a lot of moving. And it is present year round, and you will frequently see it in flocks. Could be big or small, but they are most frequently seen with some buddies around. So the markings on these birds, there is some difference between the male and the female. The male has this sort of reddish brown on the back of the head, and a little bit of reddish brown on the wings. And the male also has this black stuff like he's, I don't know, like he spilled something when he was eating or something. This black coming down from the black beak down under the chin to kind of the upper part of the breast. And that will stand out pretty prominently as you're looking at them. Here's another brown bird. This is more of a warm brown color, a little lighter. This is the mourning dove. It is a little larger than a robin, and it is present year round, and the sexes look alike. It perches, as you can see, with all the birds on this wire, and it sits upright. A particular thing to note about the shape of the mourning dove is the tail. It's quite long for the size of the bird, and you can see it's pointed. The wings are also pointed, so when they're sitting, perching, you can see the wings pointing and extending a little ways down the tail. And you may have noticed, if you've seen mourning doves, if you once they take off from their perch wherever they're sitting, you'll hear this sort of whinnying noise. Whoa, 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 whoa. That noise is actually created by the feathers themselves. It is not created by the bird's, sound making mechanism. It's the feathers passing through the air. It's kind of a fun thing to observe. And my slide doesn't want to advance. I don't know what happened just there. That's very odd. All right, moving swiftly along. Here is another brown bird. This is the Carolina wren. It's a perching bird, and flitting is almost an understatement. It is on the go. It is sometimes hard to spot because it's in and out, but keep an eye on it. It's a sparrow-sized bird, and it is present year-round, and the sexes look alike. Has kind of a round, stubby body, and the tail is pretty short compared to its body, and it has a habit of kind of flicking that tail up. You can see in the silhouette that this tail will sometimes be almost perpendicular to the body of the bird. It's just kind of a fun trait of this bird. So the features are, again, mostly brown, a little darker brown on the back than underneath. The underneath is a little lighter. You can also watch for this, we call it an eyebrow. There's a light colored streak above the eye extending back to the nape of the neck. And that's really easy to spot even from a distance. You can see also that the beak is somewhat long, it's a light color, and it's a little curved instead of being straight. Now here is a somewhat brown bird that you may see in your backyard. It's not as common because this is a bird of prey, meaning a bird that hunts live animals as opposed to eating seed. But they are sometimes seen in suburban areas, in a city area. And if you're more out in the country, you may be more likely to see this as well. It's a crow-sized bird, and it's present year-round. Besides the breast color, which is kind of a red-orange, the easiest ways to identify this bird are the tail markings and the behavior. So the tail markings, you can see a little bit in the photo on the right. They have thick black bands on kind of a white background, and the bands are perpendicular to kind of the main axis, the main body of the bird. It's easy to see on the top of the tail as well. And the behavior that helps you identify this particular hawk is the level that it flies. It will fly glide really very low to the ground and very level with very few wing beats. That's when it's looking for little critters to have for lunch. And our last category is gray birds. And this is our black-capped chickadee, mostly gray. You can see a darker gray on the back, kind of a lighter warm gray on the breast and underneath. This is a sparrow-sized bird, and the sexes do look alike, and it's present year-round. The black cap with the black under the chin and the contrasting white, you would say cheek, I guess, and the nape of the neck. That contrasting pattern is very easy to spot, pretty distinctive. And it's a perching bird, also a bird that's flitting, that's always on the move. When I'm watching it at a bird feeder, it tends to swoop in, grab a seed, and swoop away. The fun thing to watch for with the chickadee is that once it has its seed and it is swooped away, usually to a nearby tree branch, watch it eat that seed, because they will hold their seed in their feet and then they will peck on the seed as they're holding it. That's a fun behavior to look out for. Here's another gray bird, mostly gray on the back and on the top of the head. This is a tufted titmouse, and the tuft is, of course, the crest on the head. This is a perching bird that sits upright sometimes, but leaning over other times, as you can see in this photo. It also is kind of on the move, like the chickadee is. It is smaller than a robin, and it's present year-round, and the two sexes are mostly alike. You can see a female in that right-hand photo, and it's a little more dull color, maybe not quite as much of the blue-gray color as the male. Here is another blue-ish bird. I'm sorry, I didn't change my title on this one. We are calling this a gray blue bird. This is the white-breasted nuthatch. It is smaller than a sparrow and present year-round. And you can see from these two colors, the male on the left and the female on the right, the sexes are very similar in their appearance. The female on the right, you can see, doesn't have the black on top of the head. It has instead sort of the gray blue on top of the head, but otherwise very, very similar. And as we've mentioned before in this presentation, they do cling to either branches or tree trunks. And you can see with this photo of the female on the right, as I'd mentioned before, they can go up and down a tree trunk with ease, either direction. And they are also birds that are on the move. They're kind of grab and go birds if they're coming to visit your bird feeder. Another really attractive gray bird is the dark-eyed junco. It's present in this area only in the winter. So they are present right now, and you can see these great little birds right now. They are sparrow-sized. And a distinctive thing to look for is this beak, which is almost pink. And as you can see from the photograph on the right, which is a little further away, that pink beak is a real contrast to the dark gray of the head. So that is a distinctive mark you can look out for. And in addition, the underside of the bird is a much lighter gray, another distinct mark you can look out for. And these are ground feeders. They might jump up to your to your tube bird feeder, but you are much more likely to see them on the ground. They prefer that. And you will often see them in flocks. Here's another gray bird that is present year round, though I don't see them as often in the wintertime. They are present. It's about the same size as a robin, but unlike a robin, you can see in this photo on the lower right, their tails are very long in relation to their body, and they will sometimes flick them up, as you're seeing with that bird on the right. You can notice that the breast feathers are a much lighter color than the wings, so that's a good mark to look out for. And their behavior tends to be pretty bold. They will tell you who's boss. This is our last gray bird, and is actually the last bird of all of our birds. This is the northern flicker. This bird is, it's, as you could probably tell, it's related to the woodpecker. It has that long, sturdy beak, and it will perch on branches and sometimes tree trunks. It will behave pretty similarly to a woodpecker. It is a little larger than a robin, and it is present year round, and the sexes do look alike. So in addition to that long, sharp beak, you can also watch out for this red, we'll call it a mustache, this little bit of red on the cheek, which is maybe not super easy to spot from a distance, but again, if you have binoculars, it makes it easier to spot. The gray of this bird can kind of look brown, so maybe we call it a brown gray or a gray brown. You can see that the wings are a little more in this brown category than it is gray. And the last thing you can look for with a northern flicker is when it is flying, if you're able to see underneath the wings when it flies, the feathers underneath the wing are yellow. Not a super bright yellow, but definitely a different color than the rest of the bird. And just a fun fact, there's a difference between the flickers in our part of the country and the ones in the west of the Rocky Mountains. If you ever travel out there and see a northern flicker, the feathers underneath the wings are red. So this is my last slide of birds in this presentation, and I'm going to share with you a few resources that I used. These are some of the resources I used when I was putting together this presentation. And a couple of them are books, bird guides, and once I turn off my presentation, I can kind of hold them up and show you. But I do have the ISBN numbers for these two birds, Common Birds of North America Midwest edition, and the Birds of the Midwest Peterson Flash Guide, which is more of a type of guide that you would take out in the field if you were going to go walk around. I also used a bird guide. This is more an information document. It's a part of a series of documents by Chuck Oddie, who is an extension agent out in Junction City, Kansas. He also teaches the Extension Master Naturalists bird unit. So I'm familiar with Chuck. He's very knowledgeable. And he has a series of these backyard birding guides. So I referred mostly to the How to Watch Birds guide, but there are 7 or 8 of them. So they're all pretty useful. And the resource I leaned on the most, which is a fantastically useful source for bird information, is All About Birds, which is hosted by the Cornell University Lab of Ornithology, which is really considered the resource in this country for ornithology, and a lot of it for beginners, not just for expert birders or people who want to study birds. So to continue learning after this presentation, here's some things you can do on your own. I was mentioning the Cornell Lab All About Birds website. There is a free course called eBird Essentials. It's a series of videos and some text to read as well. And if you're interested in taking that course as well, you can get on this link, which I believe Juju is putting in the chat, so you can copy that out. Another resource I wanted, or informational website I wanted to point out is it's called 7 Simple Actions to Help Birds. And it is what it says on the can. It is 7 things that are reasonably easy for ordinary folks to do every day, or easily at least, to help birds survive. Because as you see in the web address, we've lost 3 billion songbirds since 1970. That's my entire life. That's a lot of birds. So the people who put this site together are trying to offer some ways that you and I can help birds stick around. And the last thing I was going to mention is an app that's available for iPhone or Android. If you are interested in a birding app, I recommend this one. It's called Merlin. It is provided by the Cornell Lab. It has some really excellent tools in there to help you identify birds, maybe when you're out on a walk, or maybe if you're just watching your bird feeders through the window. One more thing I'm going to add is that if you are looking for more information about birds, if you are on Facebook, there are a few birding groups on Facebook that are specific to Kansas, and some of them also specific to the Kansas City area. You can take a look for those. And if you want to continue looking at birds, maybe you want to get out in the field and look at them, you can watch on Facebook and other places for field trips. The Audubon Society of Greater Kansas City offers bird field trips, and the Wild Birds Unlimited store also has some field trips. And these are for people of all levels of expertise. Beginners are absolutely welcome, and the people on these bird walks will be glad to help you identify some birds. So with that, Juju, I'm going to stop sharing. And as I said, I'm going to hold up these books. This is one of the books that I used to create this presentation. It's pretty small. And this is the flash guide. So it folds, unfolds. Got a lot of birds on it. You can probably see that it's shiny. It's laminated, so it makes it mostly weatherproof and pretty handy to use. So, Juju, do we have questions? Maybe I can answer.
We do have a few. So I've put all of those links in the chat along with a PDF that gives the overview of the GIST method. And the last thing is we did lay out this presentation in a manner similar to The Birds of Kansas by Stan Tequila. This book is really helpful because it doesn't have all those extra birds that you're not likely to see here. It sticks to the 115 species that you are likely to occur. This is the book that we had a little giveaway that you guys the first 30 people to sign up were able to come get these from our office. So this is a very easy to use guide because it actually separates the birds by color. So you can, do your method to look for your size and color and features and have it, and then reference this book starting with the color. And it is nice because it does separate out some, when the females are a different color than the male, it does go ahead and classify the different genders according to their color, but tells you like, the male is more this color, so go to this page. So this book is a pretty good beginner book. Beth, one of our last questions was, is there a birding guide you would recommend for beginning birders?
I mean, the flash guide is really very helpful. I mean, it doesn't have a ton of information about birds, but it will have just a few remarks about what the bird looks like. And this one that I have here is, there are several of these flash guides, and this one is called Birds of the Midwest. So this is really the one that you would want to grab first if you got this guide. This one, the common birds of North America, also the birds of Kansas that Juju mentioned. I think for beginning birders, those are all terrific resources because they have good either photos or illustrations. They're giving you quite a lot of information about the gist characteristics, the behavior, the appearance, the habitat.
Yes. Okay, so we do have a few questions in the chat. And this one I think I've seen twice, so we'll go ahead and get to that. Do robins migrate?
Generally, no. They tend to stick around the same area, and they are found all over the continental United States. If they do migrate, they don't go very far. So, without a name tag, you can't tell if the ones that you're seeing are the same ones that you see all year round. But in general, they're not really going anywhere or not going far.
I had another person wanting to know a little bit more about grackles. Mm-hmm. Would you, is this a bird that you would prefer in your backyard, or are they more bothersome bird like blue jays are?
I mean, bothersome is, I consider it a matter of opinion. Now, blue jays certainly are kind of bossy, you might say, and grackles similarly so. They're not bashful, but I wouldn't call them nuisance birds. I mean, they're really they just behave differently than many of the songbirds we have. I would think they would not be too distracting or bothersome for feeder birds because the grackles are really ground birds. They prefer to forage on the ground, and they like to just hop around on the ground. So I think they're not going to be too bothersome to the birds that are going to your platform feeders or your tube feeders.
Yeah, and I tend to see grackles most often actually in parking lots. Especially at restaurants where there's food for them to forage. I can't tell you how many times I've seen grackles eating French fries. Grackles can be a nuisance to farmers, to corn crops. They can come in fairly large groups, but in the backyard, probably not as much of a nuisance. Another question we had is, how do the lights people keep on in their backyards late into the evening impact our birds?
Lights do affect bird behavior somewhat, but from what I've heard and read, it's my understanding that it's larger areas of light that are more distracting to birds. You may have heard about this in relation to migration. When the migrating birds are flying through, they can get confused by large buildings that are all lit up. They might think, oh, well, maybe I should stop here. No, not really. I would think that just having some lights on around your house is probably not a big problem for birds. I mean, I understand that you may want to have some lights on around your house just for security, to make sure you can see what's going on around your house at night. So it's not something I would lose sleep over. Juju, I don't know if you have a different opinion.
Evening lights, I don't think affect birds as much. And in some cases, some birds actually, like nighthawks, use evening lights because insects are attracted to them. So in very specific situations, it's kind of a bird feeder. Okay, so someone asked where they can find that flash guide. I would say online, if you look up the title of that. And someone else wanted to know if we're going to be offering a session on feeding and housing environments for our backyards. The answer to that is yes. You will be getting an email very soon about the next birding class we're going to offer, and it is going to be about backyards for your birds. Someone wants to know specifically about birds and feeders. So you should definitely attend our next class. But Beth, if we are not seeing many birds on feeders, how do we encourage them to come back? And this is partially a seasonality. Seasonality definitely affects this, but I'll let Beth answer it.
Sure. I think in general, what you can do is just pay attention to what you're feeding, what's in your bird feeder. If you buy your bird seed at like the hardware store, or the big box store or something like that, you're likely to get something that's a mix and may not have food that's attractive to the birds that you are more interested in seeing. If you're trying to attract specific birds, I would suggest going to a bird specialty store and asking them what kind of feed or seeds will attract particular birds, and they can give you lots and lots of information on that.
That's right. And it is typically most critical to try and feed birds late fall and through the winter and early spring. During the summer, there's a lot of additional food sources for them to find. So we had a question. I thought I had some flickers with red on the back of their heads, but are they really woodpeckers of some sort?
A bird that is shaped like a flicker is very likely to be a woodpecker. That body shape, that style of clinging to branches and tree trunks, and the long pointed beak. There are a couple of woodpeckers that have red on the back of the head. They're not necessarily as sort of gray and brown as the flicker. So if you see these birds again, kind of pay attention more to what the prominent colors are. The woodpeckers that we have in this area tend to be more of the black and white with a little bit of red type of coloration. And getting one of those guides, or specifically a bird guide that is narrowed in on the Midwest, will help you identify them, because we in the Midwest have kind of a small number of woodpeckers, so it'll really help you narrow it down.
Someone else asked, they have a brown thrasher that comes back into their yard every spring, and they know they migrate, but could this be the same bird? It definitely could. The only way to know for sure would be to band the bird, and that's a technique that scientists use to identify individual birds, typically with a little colored numbered band on their leg. And then they also asked, how long do birds normally live?
Oh gosh, that varies between species, and that's not something that I have immediately to mind. But again, I would direct you to the All About Birds website, which is just a fount of information. You can certainly find that information if you look up a particular species of bird.
Yeah, so many birds do show site fidelity year to year. And birds can live to be 20, 30, 40, really old. So it definitely depends on the species. And of course, nature plays a huge role in that. Someone else asked, is it bad to feed birds dry bread?
Another one that I'm not 100% positive about. It's my inclination to say probably not in small amounts, but I'm not going to I'm not going to say that that's an absolute. Again, if you are visiting a wild bird store, a bird specialty store, I would ask about that as well, because I think they would be more informed about that than I am.
It's most likely that there are better things to feed birds that have higher nutrient content for them and won't fill their stomach as much with the extras. Okay, I think this is the last question we have time for. Someone recently heard that it might not be okay to attract birds to your feeder. This was because of the fear of congregating birds to encourage them to put their heads into the same feeding slot could allow birds to spread pathogens to each other. Is this a valid concern? So here in the extension office, I do get a lot of calls about people when they see sick birds. And I've had discussions about this with actually our state animal disease specialists at Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. And, for the most part, this isn't a huge concern unless you're seeing a lot of sick birds. And then what we recommend is that you go ahead and take your bird feeder and your bird bath, your bird watering sources down, disinfect them, clean them. And then sometimes it's best to go ahead and leave them down for a few weeks to allow the birds to disperse into other areas so that they're not congregating where those sick birds were. But for the most part, we haven't seen a massive outbreak in anything. And typically the disease specialists don't start to get very concerned until you're seeing like many, many sick birds in your backyard. But if you do see birds that have puffy eyes and look ill, you can definitely contact our office and we can investigate that further with you to see if we need to elevate that to the state so that they can do some pathology testing. And yes, you can also have several feeders to eliminate congregating. And it's also, if you are into feeding birds, then different types of bird feeders also will help to spread out your different species. So I think that is all we had time for today. If you have additional questions, you can send me an email. Regularly cleaning feeders. How often is regular? I'll answer this real quick. Every few weeks, once a month would be wonderful. Most people never clean their feeders, so even if you did it once a season, you would be ahead of the curve. A diluted bleach solution that you let completely dry is appropriate to clean your feeders. So I hope everyone has a good day, and feel free to reach out to our office if you have any questions about anything. Thank you for attending.